Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. After months of off and on negotiations, a peace agreement is now in place to end a nearly 20 months of brutal fighting between South Sudan government forces and the opposition led by President Salva Kiir's former deputy Riek Machar. Mr. Kiir himself expressed doubts about the pact holding even before signing the agreement Wednesday during a ceremony in the capital, Juba.
We will sign this document, but I warn you, you regional leaders, to stand with us in the implementation. Otherwise, we may spoil it if it is left to us. There is now fighting today, and that fighting was uncalled for.
Rebel leader Riek Machar signed the agreement last week, but he too expressed concerns about the stability of the pact. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta says both sides should not allow their reservations to stand in the way of them achieving lasting peace.
Is that I know some have reservations. I will appeal to you to set aside those reservations, to look at the greater picture, to look at the people that you lead, to look at the need for peace, to look at the need for unity.
The United Nations Security Council threatened sanctions against South Sudan if Kiir failed to sign the agreement. The deal follows months of negotiations hosted by Ethiopia and several broken ceasefire agreements. Now, while the signing of the peace deal is being welcomed, some are warning that international attention needs to be maintained to ensure that peace holds. For more perspective on the situation, I'm joined by Dan Sullivan, Policy Director of the United to End Genocide. Mr. Sullivan, welcome to Africa 54.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so while people, or some people might be celebrating, you kind of feel like there is a need to sit back and watch a little bit and kind of think through this thing.
That's right. Yeah, there's certainly some celebration because this is the best peace deal we've seen since the start of fighting some 20 months ago. But there's a long way to go still. So the international community needs to remain vigilant. International pressure was critical to bringing this about and is going to be critical in making sure that the peace is actually implemented.
What do you make of the fact that both leaders say they have reservations about this deal? It was kind of pushed on them by regional leaders.
Yeah, I think that shows the importance of the international pressure from the regional group IGAD, South Sudan's neighbors, and from China, the U.S., the UN Security Council. The latest on the reservations, President Kiir had presented 12 pages of reservations. The latest on that is that the U.S. and others are saying that he signed the agreement, which is there, and those reservations do not apply.
Yes. Now, given the history of South Sudan, what can the international community do? We know that they have reached some kind of pacts in the past, broken them, gone to war.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a long history of broken peace agreements, and since 20 months ago the violence started, there have been at least 8 different agreements that have been violated. So what's really important is the international pressure. There was the U.S. had threatened a UN Security Council resolution that would bring an arms embargo and targeted sanctions at some of the leaders in South Sudan who are refusing to go along with peace. So that needs to be kept up.
What is your assessment of the situation on the ground in South Sudan, the humanitarian situation especially?
Yeah, unfortunately, though, the peace agreement is a glimmer of hope. It's amid immense suffering. There's over 2 million people have been displaced, and there's 200,000 people staying at what are called civilian protection sites that the UN has. And something like 70% of the population is facing the dangers of hunger in the coming months. So having a peace agreement and actual ceasefire, which is supposed to come in within 72 hours, will be critical to helping the people who are suffering right now.
What about the issue of holding people accountable for what has already happened, for all the atrocities?
Yeah, that's going to be one of the most important follow-through activities. The United Nations set up a panel of experts who just came out with a report that shows more atrocities. Atrocities have been committed on both sides: rapes, burning of people in houses, all kinds of horrible things. So That needs to be addressed, and part of the agreement does include a hybrid court, but how exactly that's going to be played out is yet to be seen. But yes, accountability is critical.
And in terms of specifically the United States, some see it as having a kind of a bigger hand in ensuring peace in South Sudan. What are your thoughts?
Yes, it absolutely has a critical role to play. I was in South Sudan on the day of independence, and you could feel the joy that was going on. And a lot of that came from the United States stepping up and pushing that forward. And this latest agreement, President Obama's most recent trip to Africa, he really prioritized this. And as I mentioned at the UN Security Council, the U.S. Really drafted this potential resolution that would threaten arms embargo and targeted sanctions. So the U.S. really was a part of midwifing this country and has a special responsibility and needs to keep that up.
Yeah. Well, Dan, thank you very much for your perspectives.
Thank you.
Well, Dan Sullivan is Policy Director at the United to End Genocide.